In the vast silence that exists beyond the threshold of death, in those unmeasured spaces where consciousness continues its eternal journey, there lies a mystery so profound and so deliberately concealed that it has shaped the entire trajectory of human civilization. The ancient texts, those fragments that have survived the purges of history, speak of a journey that the soul undertakes after the physical body has ceased to function. This is not a journey of punishment or reward in any simplistic sense, but rather a profound process of recognition, integration, and transformation. The soul, they say, must traverse multiple dimensions of consciousness, each one revealing deeper truths about the nature of existence itself. Yet what are these dimensions truly? What tests must the soul endure, and why has this essential knowledge been so systematically obscured from human awareness, leaving humanity to face death with fear and ignorance rather than understanding and grace? I discovered the first fragments of this ancient knowledge in a series of encounters that began when I was barely 20 years old. My grandmother, a woman of profound spiritual depth whose life had been devoted to understanding the mysteries of consciousness, lay dying in a hospital room. In her final hours, she called me to her bedside and pressed an ancient journal into my hands. The journal contained accounts of near-death experiences, visions of the afterlife, and descriptions of a journey that the soul undertakes after physical death. She whispered to me, her voice barely audible, "The knowledge you hold in your hands has been preserved by our family for generations. It is time for you to understand what lies beyond the veil, so that you may help others face their own transition with wisdom rather than fear." From that moment forward, I became obsessed with understanding the true nature of the soul's journey after death, driven by a compulsion that transcended ordinary curiosity. The call was undeniable, a resonance so deep that it seemed to emanate from the very core of my being, urging me to seek the knowledge that had been hidden, to restore the narrative that had been deliberately obscured from human consciousness. As a clinical psychoanalyst, I had spent years exploring the depths of human consciousness, yet nothing had prepared me for the magnitude of what I was about to discover. My investigation led me to discover a hidden network of scholars and mystics, guardians of ancient wisdom, who had preserved the true teachings about the soul's journey across generations of suppression and distortion. They called themselves the Keepers of the Eternal Passage, and they maintained hidden archives containing texts that predated all known religious traditions. Through their guidance, I learned that the journey of the soul after death was not a single event, but rather a complex process that unfolded across multiple dimensions of consciousness. The soul, upon leaving the physical body, entered what the ancients called the first threshold, a realm of transition where it encountered its own reflection, confronting all the choices it had made during its earthly existence. This was not a judgment imposed by external forces, but rather a direct confrontation with the consequences of one's own actions and intentions. The soul then proceeded through the second threshold, a dimension where it encountered other souls with whom it had shared karmic connections, engaging in profound exchanges of understanding and forgiveness. The third threshold was a realm of cosmic consciousness, where the soul perceived the interconnectedness of all existence and recognized itself as an inseparable part of the universal whole. Yet, as religious institutions consolidated power, this sophisticated understanding of the afterlife was deemed too threatening. The idea that the soul's journey was one of self-recognition and cosmic integration rather than punishment or eternal reward contradicted the narratives of control that were being constructed. The teachings were suppressed, the texts hidden, and the memory of the soul's true journey was deliberately erased from human consciousness. As I delved deeper into this forbidden knowledge, I encountered formidable resistance. Within myself, the scientific training that had defined my entire career seemed to crumble. Am I abandoning all clinical rigor? I questioned. Or am I finally discovering the true foundation upon which all understanding of consciousness had been built? Fear gripped me as I began to understand the magnitude of the revelation, the potential to overturn not just religious doctrine, but the entire philosophical foundation upon which Western civilization's understanding of death and the afterlife had been constructed. Externally, I faced subtle but persistent opposition. Colleagues began to distance themselves from my work. Funding for my research mysteriously disappeared. I received warnings, both veiled and direct, from individuals who seemed to represent powerful interests invested in keeping this knowledge buried. I experienced the loss of my professional standing, the fracturing of professional relationships, and the profound isolation that came from pursuing a truth that the mainstream world refused to acknowledge. The revelations I encountered were often disturbing, showing me the systematic violence perpetrated against those who had sought to preserve the teachings about the soul's journey, the deliberate distortion of historical records, and the ongoing suppression of knowledge that could liberate humanity from its fear of death. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The breakthrough came during a meditation conducted in a hidden sanctuary beneath an ancient temple in Egypt, a place known to initiates as the Chamber of the Eternal Passage. Here, in a space sealed and protected by ancient wards, I performed a ritual of communion, seeking direct contact with the consciousness of those who had already completed their soul's journey. As I entered a state of profound trance, my consciousness was drawn into a dimension beyond ordinary perception. I found myself standing in a vast hall of light, where countless souls moved in patterns of extraordinary beauty and complexity. They communicated with me not through words, but through direct transmission of understanding. I experienced the soul's journey after death as if I were living it myself. I felt the moment of transition, the release from the physical body, and the immediate confrontation with my own essence. I witnessed the first threshold, where I encountered every action I had taken, every word I had spoken, every thought I had harbored. Not as judgment, but as direct experience of consequence. I understood that this was not punishment, but rather the soul's own mechanism for integration and growth. I proceeded through the second threshold, where I encountered souls with whom I had shared profound connections across multiple lifetimes. I experienced exchanges of forgiveness and understanding that transcended all ordinary human emotion. I witnessed the dissolution of all resentment, all blame, all separation, replaced by a profound recognition of the essential unity underlying all existence. I entered the third threshold, and here my consciousness expanded to encompass dimensions of understanding that my ordinary mind could barely contain. I perceived the universe not as a collection of separate objects, but as a unified field of consciousness, where every atom, every being, every dimension was interconnected in patterns of extraordinary beauty and meaning. I understood that the soul's journey after death was not an ending, but a continuation of an eternal process of awakening and integration. The revelation was cataclysmic, a complete dissolution of my understanding of death and the afterlife. I realized that the entire history of human civilization's relationship with death could be reinterpreted as a struggle between those seeking to suppress the memory of the soul's true journey and those working to preserve and restore it. I saw that the suppression of this knowledge had created a fundamental wound in human consciousness, a disconnection from the understanding of death that manifested as fear, denial, and the systematic devaluation of spiritual wisdom. The impact was transformative, leaving my consciousness forever altered by direct contact with the reality of the soul's eternal journey. The intensity of this experience left me in a state of profound integration and transformation. I emerged from the chamber in a condition of deep communion with the understanding of the soul's journey. My consciousness expanded to encompass dimensions of awareness previously inaccessible to me. I retreated to a secluded sanctuary, a place maintained by the keepers of the Eternal Passage, where I could process the magnitude of what I had experienced. For months, I remained in contemplative silence, my mind a vast landscape where the boundaries between personal and universal consciousness began to dissolve. The conflicts within me, the struggle between my former scientific identity and my awakening to spiritual truth, slowly transformed into a higher synthesis. I understood that the suppression of knowledge about the soul's journey had not been the result of malice alone, but of fear. Fear that the full realization of humanity's understanding of death would lead to a fundamental transformation of consciousness and society. I spoke to myself in the language of symbols and metaphor, my thoughts flowing in patterns that mirrored the soul's journey itself. I began to perceive the world as a living expression of the eternal process of consciousness, each being a unique manifestation of the soul's infinite journey. I emerged from my retreat with a clear sense of purpose and profound wisdom. I understood that my role was not to wage war against those who had perpetuated the suppression of this knowledge, but to become a living conduit through which the understanding of the soul's journey could be gradually restored to human consciousness. I began to teach, not in conventional academic settings, but through a series of contemplative practices and sacred rituals designed to reconnect individuals with the understanding that death was not an ending, but a transformation. I wrote books that appeared to be scholarly works on comparative spirituality, yet contained encoded wisdom that would resonate with those ready to receive it. I established a network of sacred circles and meditation centers, places where seekers could directly encounter the reality of the soul's journey through their own inner experience. I collaborated with artists, musicians, and spiritual practitioners to translate the ancient teachings into forms that could touch the contemporary heart and imagination. My most significant contribution was the creation of a practice I called the preparation for passage, a meditation technique that allowed individuals to familiarize themselves with the dimensions of consciousness they would encounter after death, to integrate the understanding of the soul's journey into their living experience. I understood that the restoration of this knowledge would not come through intellectual debate or institutional reform, but through the lived experience of individuals recognizing themselves as eternal beings, as souls on an infinite journey of awakening and integration. As I continued my work, I became increasingly aware that I was not acting alone, that the presence of those who had completed their soul's journey continued to guide and support my efforts, that the knowledge of the Eternal Passage continued to flow through those sensitive enough to perceive it. I recognized that the soul's journey after death was not a relic of the distant past, but an eternal reality, waiting for humanity to remember its true nature and reclaim its birthright as conscious beings capable of understanding and embracing the mystery of death with wisdom and grace. What truth about your own eternal journey lies dormant within your consciousness, waiting to awaken you to the understanding that death is not an ending, but a transformation into dimensions of awareness beyond ordinary comprehension? And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.